My mornings usually start the same way. I like order and predictability. It's how I've kept myself safe all these years. Ethan, my best friend and roommate, calls me paranoid, but he doesn't complain when I remind him to double-check the locks before bed. He's practical like that. Someone who understands my quirks without pushing too hard against them. Our little house in the suburbs feels like a sanctuary. We've lived here for almost 2 years, and while it's not perfect, it's ours. On days like today, with the sun streaming through the windows and the air warm enough to make you sweat, it's easy to believe nothing could ever go wrong. But even on peaceful days, my instincts don't rest. I notice things other people might not. Like the tiny smudge on the window I hadn't seen before. It wasn't much, just a faint streak, but I couldn't stop myself from wondering how it got there. Maybe it was Ethan being careless, or maybe it was just my overactive mind finding patterns where none existed. Either way, I made a mental note to clean it later. I settled onto the couch in the living room, my favorite spot because it gives me a clear view of the front door. Something about knowing I can see who's coming helps me feel in control. The knock at the door came around noon. It wasn't the friendly, confident knock of a neighbor dropping by. It was soft, hesitant, almost testing. I froze for a moment, my book slipping from my hands. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a text from Ethan letting me know he was on his way home early, but there was nothing. My pulse quickened as I listened to the knocking turn into a series of doorbell rings. Not rapid or urgent, just persistent enough to make my skin crawl. From where I sat, I could see the shadow of someone through the frosted glass panel of the door. My stomach dropped when I realized it wasn't anyone I recognized. The shape of the figure was tall and bulky, like a man wearing something heavy. That didn't make sense, not on a day as warm as this. My first thought was that maybe he was a delivery driver, but there were no packages in sight. I stayed still, hoping whoever it was would just give up and leave. But he didn't. The knocking stopped for a moment, and then I heard a faint sound, something scraping lightly against the door. My breath caught in my throat. I edged closer to the door, keeping low, and peered through the peephole. The man was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head. Sweat gleamed on his face, making his presence all the more bizarre in this heat. When he spoke, his voice was muffled, almost a mumble. "I'm here to see the dog," he said. The words didn't register at first. I blinked, confused. There was no dog. We'd never owned one. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. This didn't feel right. Something about the way he stood there, not moving, made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and texted Ethan. "There's a guy at the door, says he's here for the dog. What should I do?" Ethan's reply came almost instantly. "Don't open it. They call me if he doesn't leave." His calmness gave me a sliver of comfort, but it didn't stop my hands from trembling. The knocking started again, more insistent this time. I retreated to the couch, my eyes fixed on the door. The warmth of the sun streaming into the room suddenly felt oppressive, like it was trapping me in place. I didn't know what the man wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't here by accident. The knocking stopped again, and for a moment, I thought he might have left. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, and I strained to hear any sign of movement outside. Then I heard it, a soft, scratching sound, like nails or something sharper, dragging against the glass of the front window. My breath hitched. I didn't want to move, but my curiosity and fear got the better of me. Staying low, I crept to the edge of the couch and peeked through the blinds. He was standing just outside the window, his face pressed close enough to fog the glass. My stomach flipped. His expression was blank, almost detached, as though he wasn't looking at me, but through me. I dropped the blinds and crawled back to the couch, my hands trembling so hard, I nearly dropped my phone. I opened my messages to Ethan and typed, "He's at the window now. I think he's trying to look inside." Ethan replied quickly, "Call the police." Now I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Calling the police seemed so final. What if I was wrong? What if he wasn't dangerous, just weird? But then I remembered the exact way he had said, "I'm here to see the dog." He had known there wasn't one. That wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. My hands were shaking too much to type a response. Instead, I pressed the call button next to Ethan's name. "He's still there," I whispered when he picked up. "He hasn't left." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Listen to me. Go to the bathroom, lock the door, take your phone with you and call the police. I'll be there as soon as I can." I wanted to argue, to tell him I could handle it, but the truth was, I couldn't. Not this time. My usual vigilance, the thing that had kept me safe all these years, was failing me now. I grabbed my phone and darted down the hallway, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear the creak of the bathroom door as I shut it behind me. I locked the door and slid down to the floor, my back against the cool tiles. My fingers fumbled as I dialed the emergency number. The operator's voice was calm, professional, but I could barely form the words to explain what was happening. "There's a man outside my house," I said, my voice trembling. He's been knocking and looking through the windows. He said he's here for a dog, but I don't have one. And now he's scratching at the glass." The operator assured me that officers were on their way. She told me to stay on the line and keep the bathroom door locked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and whispered, "Okay." The scratching stopped, but I wasn't relieved. The silence felt even worse, like the calm before a storm. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he gone? Or was he waiting, hiding somewhere I couldn't see? I didn't have the courage to go back out and check. Every creak of the house, every distant sound outside, made me jump. I tried to focus on the operator's steady voice, but the fear was too overwhelming. Then I heard it again, the faint sound of something rustling near the front porch. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tighter. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't over yet. I stayed in the bathroom, waiting for the police, feeling the weight of every second stretch into an eternity. For the first time, I began to doubt whether even my precautions were enough to keep me safe. The police arrived 15 minutes after I called, though it felt like hours. When I finally heard their knock on the door, followed by a firm, "Police, open up," I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly brought me to tears. I stayed in the bathroom for a moment longer, gripping my phone as if letting go would make the intruder reappear. When I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, I could see flashing red and blue lights spilling through the windows. Ethan had arrived too, his car parked just behind the patrol vehicle. The officers were thorough, checking the entire property and asking detailed questions. By the time Ethan and I sat down with them in the living room, my legs felt like jelly. "He was here for a while," I explained, my voice still shaky. "He knocked, rang the doorbell, scratched the windows, and then he just stopped." I glanced at Ethan, who had been quiet since walking through the door, his face tight with worry. One of the officers nodded, jotting down notes. "And you said he mentioned a dog?" "Yes," I said, my fingers twisting nervously in my lap. "But we don't have one. I don't know why he would say that." Ethan's voice was calm but tense. "It's not just that. There's something else you need to see." He gestured for me to follow him. I hesitated, unsure of what he meant, but the serious look on his face made me get up and trail after him. He led me to the front porch where he pointed to the unused planter near the door. Inside was a crumpled yellow grocery bag. "I found it when I got here," he said quietly. "I didn't open it until the police showed up." The officer closest to us pulled on a pair of gloves and carefully reached into the bag. What he pulled out made my stomach churn. A piece of paper with shaky, handwritten words. "You're not as safe as you think." I took a step back, my chest tightening. The note felt like a physical blow, confirming what I had been dreading since the man first appeared. This wasn't random. He wasn't just wandering the neighborhood or looking for someone else. He had chosen us, me. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions grim. "We'll need to take this as evidence," one of them said, placing the note into a plastic bag. "We'll also need to check your security cameras if you have any." "We don't," Ethan admitted, his voice laced with regret. I could see the frustration in his eyes, though he didn't say anything directly to me. It wasn't the time for blame, but I could feel the weight of his unspoken words. The rest of the night was a blur. The police assured us they would patrol the area and keep an eye out for anyone matching the description I gave. They urged us to stay vigilant and consider upgrading our home security. By the time they left, exhaustion had set in, but sleep felt impossible. Ethan and I sat in silence for a while, the note still burning in my mind. "This isn't your fault," he said finally, his voice softer now. "You did everything right." I wanted to believe him, but the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. Maybe if I had called the police sooner, they could have caught him. Maybe if I had been braver, I could have done something more. The questions circled endlessly in my head, and no matter how much Ethan tried to reassure me, the fear wouldn't let go. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. Too exposed, too vulnerable. As much as I wanted to pretend everything would go back to normal, deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Not after this. Ethan and I didn't sleep that night. We didn't even try. Instead, we sat in the living room, every creak of the house making us both flinch. I kept glancing at the front door, expecting to see the man return, though I knew the police were patrolling the neighborhood. The note sat heavy in my mind, its words echoing with a sinister finality. "You're not as safe as you think." By morning, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me feeling hollow and drained. Ethan brewed coffee in the kitchen, his movements robotic, as though he too were running on fumes. "We need to go," he said abruptly, setting 2 mugs on the table. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Pack a bag. We'll stay at my mom's for a few days, at least until we figure out what to do." I hesitated. The thought of leaving our home, even temporarily, felt like giving up. But Ethan was right. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt invaded, tainted by the presence of that man and his cryptic message. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Packing was surreal. I moved through the house like a ghost, grabbing essentials without really thinking. Every room felt different, like it belonged to someone else. The sunlight streaming through the windows, which had always felt warm and welcoming, now seemed harsh and unkind. Ethan helped me with my bag, his usual calmness cracking under the weight of the situation. We left just after midday. The drive to his mother's house was quiet, the tension between us unspoken but palpable. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. I kept expecting to see the man in the hoodie, lurking on a corner or standing beneath a tree. The thought made my chest tighten, but I pushed it down. Ethan's mother greeted us with open arms and concern etched across her face. She didn't ask many questions, for which I was grateful. After settling into the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my suitcase. For the first time in hours, I let myself cry. The tears came in a rush, years of carefully maintained control unraveling in a single moment. Ethan found me there and sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder, saying nothing but offering everything I needed in that moment. That night, I lay awake, my thoughts circling the same questions. Who was the man? Why us? What did he want? The lack of answers was maddening. I'd always relied on my instincts to keep me safe, but this time, they hadn't been enough. The sense of failure gnawed at me, even as I tried to remind myself that we had done everything we could. The days at Ethan's mother's house were quiet but heavy. We talked about next steps, getting a security system, possibly even moving, but the weight of the unknown hung over every conversation. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my mind, searching for clues or signs I might have missed. The note's message, its chilling simplicity, haunted me. Eventually, I realized something important. I couldn't let fear define me. The man might have shaken my sense of safety, but he hadn't taken everything. I still had Ethan, I still had my ability to adapt, and I still had control over my choices. As uncertain as the future felt, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this man, or the fear he brought, destroy what I had built. The house might never feel the same again, but I wasn't the same either. I was stronger now, even if it didn't feel that way. And as I sat on the porch of Ethan's mother's house, watching the sun set over the quiet street, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way to reclaim my life, one cautious step at a time.